For those of you guys tuning in, welcome to another edition of Tech School. We got an awesome speaker today, somebody who's, been a kind of a member of our ecosystem for a long time now, Austen Goodson. And so of course we love him, right? We know a lot about him. We're excited for him to be able to share some knowledge with everyone out there. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, not real time, not live, but watching the recording, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. The more interactions we get with videos like this, the more that this gets pushed out to people. And, who knows that somebody, that comment that you put or that like could have helped us reach somebody and really help this startup out. So feel free to do that if you can. And so I'll give kind of a short little spiel on Austen, and then I'll let him kind of fill in the gaps on what I miss. But so Austin's always been a very passionate person about science, creativity, technical wizardry, all that stuff. And so I think that's what really drove him to become an engineer. He's a USC grad, kind of like Curling and I. So for all you USC alums out there, fight on. And I think, Austin, you correct me here, but I think you started in what, civil engineering, right? You did engineering physics and kind of went down that route.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then of course, in today's world, right? Science and technology and programming, right? Computer science have kind of been on the rise, and one thing led to another, sparked his interest. And I think it was back in 2018, you moved to San Diego, right?
Yeah. About 2 years ago.
Yeah, and started diving more into the tech side of things. Got up on the startup scene in San Diego, and now I work for Paylease as a software engineer. So I'll let you kind of, I'll hand it off to you, and you can fill in the gaps that I missed. But thanks,
Yeah.
Austin, for being on today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, like Stephen said, my interest was sparked by just technology, and everything going on in the tech industry was really interesting to me. So I ended up teaching myself to code, and over the course of a couple of years landed in San Diego, where I decided to make the switch. And since then I, dove into the startup community, owe a lot to Curling and Steven and all the Fokcus people for kind of taking me under the wing for a bit there, and was able to get connected and ended up at Zego/Paylease, and most recently now at Diversifund. So yeah, it's been kind of a crazy ride, but I've learned a lot and it's been a lot of fun. I love tech, love science, and love how we can use it just to reach a lot of people and do a lot of good stuff. So yeah. Any questions?
I think what we'll do is we'll use a chat for any questions. We have some questions already for you from some of the other startups too, Austin, but we'll let you do your presentation first.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll get to it then. Cool. So how to choose a tech stack? I kind of gave my interest view earlier. This is focused for mainly for the non-technical founder who doesn't really know what the technologies are out there. I have a couple blurbs for the technical founder, and I'm going to talk just a second about infrastructure, because when you're talking about how you're going to build something and what you're going to build it with, you often come to the question of where are we going to put it afterward, and how are we going to deliver it to our users. So I'll talk about that just for a second. So what do you even look for as a technical founder? Do you want this guy? Maybe not. But if you're starting from scratch, there's a couple steps I kind of lay out. So one, find a technical co-founder who's made stuff you like. If you have a technical co-founder and that person has a skill set, that's probably your number one choice, because they have a preference, they know what they're doing, and if you trust them, then that's the way to go. Second is find someone who knows JavaScript really well, because if you're building an application that's going to reach anyone, really, JavaScript is the language of the web, and now it's of mobile too. So someone who knows JavaScript really well can really do almost anything. Whether you're making a mobile application, a web application, even desktop applications, there's some softwares that allow you to convert JavaScript into desktop code. And here I'm going to list a bunch of technologies here because these are kind of what I would call very mainstream, very like these are what a lot of people are using. These are my personal I really like these. I think they're great. And so when you're going out and searching for someone who can build an MVP, I would say you probably want to look for these words, look for people who are building stuff using this tech. So on the mobile side, I put this first. You have things like Flutter, which is Google's platform for doing stuff in both Android and Apple. You have React Native, which is written in JavaScript, which, like I said, if you have someone who knows JavaScript, they can go into React Native and they can start figuring things out. But usually with mobile, you'll always have to have someone who knows Java and Swift, which are the corresponding Android and Apple languages. So those are just kind of a really high level view of look for this kind of tech, because these are very mainstream. A lot of people are using them, and they're gonna, if you can get MVP built in one of these, then you won't have too much trouble finding developers who enjoy working in it. And then for the web, this is kind of the two, I would say, biggest kind of front end web technologies that are using are called Vue.js and React. From my perspective, I think React is kind of the most ubiquitous, kind of well-known. Everyone's like, oh yeah, we want to build a React app. So that's the one that people are really going to know and is really popular. But Vue.js is definitely on the rise too, and I would argue is almost as popular with developers as React. They both have their different strengths and weaknesses, and they both do certain things a little bit better. So if you go with one of those, you're gonna be solid. And Redux, that's just part of React. That's like a library that works with React, or Vue, or any other JavaScript. So that's not as important. But I would focus on Vue.js and React. And then for your backend technologies, so this is all going to depend what you're actually building as a founder. Are you providing a service? Are you providing are you just focused on kind of your front end application? I just put this list here as a general reference for you have no idea what you're looking for, kind of look for these things. So here's a couple of things. Like Express is built using Node.js, which is written in JavaScript. That's a really kind of a really solid, ubiquitous backend API tech. So that would probably be my number one, especially if you have no idea. Just do stuff in JavaScript. JavaScript is ubiquitous. It's being used on the front end and the back end. So if you're going to build an app, you can build the entire app in JavaScript. And that's going to be the most common thing. There's also things like Django, which is built using Python. Instagram's actually built with that. Laravel, which is written in the language of PHP, a favorite of many Vue.js developers. Then there's Phoenix. I put this here because I've worked with it a little bit, and I liked it. It's if you heard the buzzword functional programming, that's pretty popular in certain circles right now. So Phoenix is a backend framework, as it's called, written in the language of Elixir, which is kind of known for its stability of being used in really robust infrastructure systems. Our telecom system is built on Erlang, which is which Elixir is written or based on Erlang. So stuff like that. So, but for the non-technical founder, if you're just I don't know what to look for, where to start, I would say just look at JavaScript, look at React, look at Express. Those are look for your MVP to written in that. So that's that. So I kind of put here, there's another aspect to this. Maybe you're a founder who is really focused on the front end. So you want the cool UI, UX, you want a dashboard that looks amazing. You have ideas for a very comprehensive like user interface like design. So kind of what I want to point out for this person is there's a difference between how the front end functions and how the front end looks. So keep in mind the technologies you're going to use for the functionality of the front end are like, as I mentioned earlier, these JavaScript libraries of Vue.js and React. But for the design of it, you may not care as much about this. This is kind of, if you really do care about how your things look, but you may know a bit about design. So like Material UI is based on what's called like an 8-point design system. And these libraries on how the front end looks on my screen right here, these are all like very focused on, they're just things in place that will make designing stuff a lot easier. So if you can find a developer or technical, company or whatever who's using these things, these are very ubiquitous, very common libraries that, a lot of different tech companies are using to create their designs. So Material UI is Google's 8-point design system. Bootstrap is just another really common one. Ant Design is used more in Asia, I believe, but they have tons and tons of pre-built, we call them components. So when you're creating an MVP and you're really concerned about UI, UX, look, keep these in mind. I think I'm going to provide this slide somehow to you guys too, so that each one, they have links to them if you want to check them out, if you want to just learn about it. So, and then there's the technical or non-technical founder who's providing a service. Maybe you're focusing on something that's like, I don't know, you want to provide some kind of back-end system that, maybe your tech queries and it like provides an API. Maybe it's like a weather service or some kind of like just information flying through the cloud, not necessarily a front-end user experience. I would say this is probably a little more rare, but in this case, you're kind of be looking for a person or co-tech founder who knows this list here. So someone who knows like the back-end tech, like things I mentioned earlier, like Django, Express, especially because that's JavaScript, or Laravel, just these things that are kind of more API back-end heavy. But you also want someone who knows DevOps, and DevOps, if you don't know, is a buzzword kind of implying a developer who also knows how to deploy and operate the code. So they know how, they understand AWS or Google Cloud, which is its equivalent. They know Nginx or Apache, which are how we like serve, or deliver our web applications. They know Linux, networking, Docker. That's a big technology that a lot of DevOps and developers are using right now to deploy their applications. So if you're providing a service and you need something like this, and you're more concerned with like, okay, I want someone who really knows the back end tech, who knows how to deliver this application, or who knows how this will work in a robust and reliable way, because I don't know, maybe you're integrating with critical infrastructure, I don't know. So these are kind of the skills and tech you want to look out for someone like that. And you could learn it, you could figure it out yourself, but if you have like a very long, I guess, plan, or maybe your startup won't come into fruition for another 5 years or something, you would have learned full stack web development during that time. Well, right now, these are kind of the technologies for you to take a look at and do some research into. So that is also an option. So for the technical founder, I have a couple just recommendations for what to do your MVP in. I have a minimalist version and kind of a more full stack version. Minimal, I just do like Vue.js in the front end, back end, if you even need it, like a Firebase. Firebase is a service provided by Google. It's very user friendly, kind of easy to get up and going. A lot of things are built in. So I would say it's a great option if you want like a very minimal MVP, and it's actually robust enough where you can actually, get users running on it. I've seen full scale applications built using it. So it's definitely, you can use it in production with actual users, but if you just want an MVP, it's also great too. Infrastructure, there's a service called Netlify, which basically delivers your app almost as soon as you program it and code it into whatever repository or place your code is. So it's a very easy to use service also. And I would say that if you want something in front of users in a month or something, you could do this minimalist version and realistically have that happen. So full stack version, that's just what I called it. But I would say front end, you want Vue.js plus Nuxt, which is just a framework built on top of Vue.js, allowing a couple more features and allowing you to do some cool stuff with the tech there. Back end, I'll probably use Laravel, which is PHP, or Express, which is JavaScript. And then infrastructure, you could probably deploy it on AWS with Docker, or you could use Netlify too. This is just a little bit more robust and configurable, probably be a little more complicated. So yeah, so that's kind of for the technical founder. If you're just thinking, oh, what do I do in an MVP? That's kind of my recommendation of things to look into and think about. And yeah, so any questions about that? Does anyone have any questions so far?
No, that's good. And cool. I like Willy Wonka and sweets, so I'm glad you put that in.
Yeah, you like
that? Good call. Okay. No questions from the part. I still have some questions from some of the startups. We'll get to that after.
Okay, sounds good. Cool. So this is just a little bit about infrastructure. For your front-end application in the future, these are technologies for you to look into and check out and see if they would work for you. But they're services that allow you to deploy and just get your application out there pretty quickly, and they have they're pretty well regarded by a lot of developers. So Heroku has been around for a long time, makes it easy to deploy applications. Netlify's similar vein. Bitrise is more for mobile applications if you have a mobile app. And then for your backend, as I mentioned earlier, kind of my go-tos are AWS EC2 instances and Google Firebase. So yeah, so those are kind of my recommendations. And these are kind of memes that developers would probably laugh at, but
yeah, they're solid. They're pretty solid.
Big feeling. But yeah, let's see. That is all I got. So
I like how you had your information up there. That's great. Yeah. Steven usually he takes over here. He probably has a few different things too.
Yeah, I got a question for you, Austen.
Yeah.
So I know you mentioned a lot of technologies here. You went through kind of the pros and cons of a lot of different technologies, different tools people could use, right, to build their tech stack and things that they could use together, right, from infrastructure, front end, back end, all that fun stuff. So in your experience, working with startups or, seeing, startups operate and try to build out their tech stack, what's been kind of one of the big hurdles that you've seen startups have to overcome when they think about their tech stack and trying to build that out?
One of the biggest hurdles? Yeah, I mean, I think when actually trying to build it out, I think, for a lot of I'm trying to think what would be a big hurdle. I think deploying it is actually one of the biggest hurdles. like actually getting it to the users. So like figuring out, okay, what infrastructure do I put that on? How do I put it on there? Who do I have help me with that? Because a lot of people will think ahead to like, oh, I can get a programmer to code it and, you know, put it all together and everything. But usually that programmer, if you want to actually get it to users, will have to figure out how to deploy it. And so I feel like, I don't know, that's kind of the most complicated part. There's a lot of things to think through, and you don't have to think through them, but, you know, a couple months later or years later or whatever, it'll come back to bite you. So I would say that's maybe the biggest hurdle, maybe even hidden hurdle, because, you know, anyone can sit down and start programming an app on almost any computer, right? But getting that to your user is a little tricky, and not everyone understands how that process works. So.
And just to follow up on that, in your experience and what you've seen, is it more important sometimes to try to pick the best tools to use in your tech stack, or is it more important to just get something up and running at first and pivot and adjust along the way?
I think, yeah, that's a good question, because I'm a firm believer in the ability to be versatile and, like, you know, pivot and figure things out. But I think I think it's probably more important to do the latter and, like, get things done. But I think it's beneficial to do the former, right? Like, it's beneficial if you have the tools and you know which tools are good up front. It'll just make the path a lot smoother and quicker. That's my opinion. So I think it is more important just, you know, to do something and get something working and out there. But I don't know. I think if you get off on the right foot, it'll be a lot smoother down the line. So.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you. I'll open it up to Curling and everyone else.
Cool.
Yeah, no, thanks, Austin. Definitely had a few questions, and even from I'm always going back to our current cohort too. We had questions about what their MVP is, and even earlier on talking with the groups too, is like how do I find a technical co-founder? I'm gonna give that question to you, Austin, that one, because we had all these really great ideas. We had all these great kind of potential for the startups, but just coming up with an MVP, we talked about, okay, are you non-technical or technical? So we've been definitely looking at what that pathway is for non-technical, but one was actually, we were saying like, well, let's see, like having a technical co-founder will be much more, I guess, helpful usually in early stages. So I'll pose that question to you.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I can't say I have the perfect answers to that, because I feel like they're kind of hard to find. They're in their back rooms on their computers coding something, right? So they're not usually out and about, unfortunately. Yeah, so, you know, I've heard of a lot of people doing, like, finding someone on, like, you know, contract websites like Upwork or other stuff, where they'll find, like, someone who is very capable of being a developer and being a co-founder, and, you know, will form a relationship that way. I think for me personally, where I've met, you know, other tech people is like at tech companies, unfortunately. So you have to, like, you know, go to a tech company and be like, kind of network with those people, because often developers will already be working a job, and so they'll already be doing something, and that's where they'll come up with an idea or hear an idea that they want to get on board with. So I think my recommendation would be to find, like, okay, what are even like the startup companies that, you know, you guys know, or the startup companies in my area that are kind of, or maybe just not startup, but established software companies where developers are kind of hanging out, and try to network with those people through, like, LinkedIn. I don't know, it's a hard thing to do. I think you won't often find tech co-founders hanging around, you know, Fokcus events necessarily, just because they're not as social, right? They're usually, unless they're like working on their startup idea and they want input and they want networking, they're usually like, programming, right? So, but I do think that I've become a believer in LinkedIn, where you can network with people pretty effectively just through, messaging and like saying like, hey, I saw you worked at this company. I have this idea. Or any interest? I've actually gotten a couple LinkedIn messages like that where I've been like, oh, that's an interesting thing. I'll go, click on the website and see what their idea is all about. So I think that is LinkedIn, and hoping they'll show up at, a networking event as well are your best bets.
No, that's good, and that's an honest way to think about it too. When I talk to some people too, I'm always saying, definitely LinkedIn. Maybe starting what your circle of friends, right?
Yeah.
and then like I think even people are saying like students too, right? If you're already in a college, like our current cohort is still at Cal State San Marcos, and some are at other universities. Like just that environment is really good too. If you're still in college, so that's great. One question I have for you offhand I always get, but I'll pose in it kind of in a different way. You actually had a great overview, so I feel like this is kind of like part one. We feel like you might do a part two, or might be other ones. This is a good overview.
Yeah.
But could you walk us through maybe just one scenario you've been through to create an MVP? Just one, how you guys kind of thought about it. We've been watching a lot behind the scenes of Mandalorian. It's always fun. What, how do they come up with that initial scene like that? So something behind the scenes of maybe what you thought about when you were talking maybe with a co-founder or something on okay, this is how I would approach creating maybe an initial MVP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm thinking of, I work with a friend of mine to kind of create this idea called Reddit Pro Tools, which was like a post scheduling, kind of like a buffer for Reddit. And so I think one of the initial things we went about was kind of defining what exactly is an MVP. So what functionality do we want to have? And I think that aspect is more what in tech we would call the product, product scope, or the product vision. So they would create user stories, create the user journey. And so I think the most important part was initially defining, okay, here is what we want the user to be able to do within the MVP, and we could kind of go from there. So once we had that kind of defined, I think for me it was more a matter of okay, what are the technologies I like, or I think are cool, or I think are effective, and let me build that out from there. And a lot of things that I had in mind when I was doing that MVP was I want to, I want to make the deployment and production as painless as possible. So I use Docker a lot, which is, used for encapsulating a lot of code and making it easy to deliver to a customer or deliver to infrastructure. So I kept that in mind as I built everything out. I think, so that kind of just, making sure you have that clear definition of this is the absolute functionality for an MVP that I want to have, and also, just committing to a particular technology that you want to use and going with that. I think those were kind of the main considerations when creating that for me. So
no, that's great. And would it be the fact that when you went through this whole process, what did it take a matter of weeks or months, or maybe something of that nature? A little just one of your scenarios.
A time frame.
For
that one, it took a long time, a year.
Right. Okay, fair enough.
So it's probably not a good example. But I would have, it also depends on how much time you have to devote to it too, right? Like if you have a developer and they're like, okay, I'm going to commit full time to making this MVP. Depending on the scope, I would estimate, 4 to 5 months probably to build that out. But for me, I was like, working a full-time job and trying to balance life, and so it took me probably year and a half to get the like minimal functionality going. So
that makes sense. I always like give people like a kind of like real talk on some of that stuff. And because I know you've been through a couple of things. Another one was actually, this is something that kind of goes with the fact that, how Fokcus, we can give, and other groups too, Y Combinator, we can all give credits, right, Austen? Like we right now, Fokcus, even if you're a cohort, we can give like 5K credits for like 2 years for AWS, right?
Mm-hmm.
Also can give credits for Google Cloud, right? When I'm thinking about that, and when we're talking to groups like that, they say, okay, so how's that going to affect me with my stack? If I choose AWS, do I get stuck with that? If I choose Google, because I have all this credits, will I get stuck? But how does it affect what I'm doing? Can you give maybe a simple answer to that? If someone's going to be choosing one of this, because they have money for that, right? That's kind of part of the startup kind of ecosystem. You get credits for these kind of cloud providers. Could you give some wisdom on that, or should they be so worried about which provider that they do?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think, especially for an MVP, it probably doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I would say it doesn't matter because, AWS and Google Cloud, they're pretty equivalent in a lot of the services that they offer. And if you're building your app kind of with that in mind, like how is it going to be deployed and how is it going to be delivered to the customer, then you can build it in such a way that, no matter where you put the code, it doesn't really matter. If you wanted to, you could move it in an instant from one place to the next. If you, especially if you use tools like Docker, or stuff like that to containerize everything and make it encapsulated. You can just literally just copy paste the code and run it wherever. So I would say no, it doesn't. I don't think it really matters like where you're going to put your code. Just if you get a good deal, then that's great.
That's good. That's great. That's great. Great to hear. We did get a question from chat. I think the one thing you might have covered part of it, but I'll tell you specifically. What other activities should be done before just jumping into development?
Well, I would say for sure, define that user journey and the user stories of the functionality that you want. I think, there's a lot of work that can be done in development. So you can start at a very minimal part of whatever functionality you're trying to build, and make the user stories as you go too. But I think it's, especially if you're if you have a particular type of app or functionality that you want to make happen, it's best to create that user story journey ahead of time before you're jumping into development. And like I said, it's nice to kind of have your tool set laid out, like, oh, I want to use these tools, so I'm just going to use them from the get-go.
That's great. Okay, I like that. We have another message from the chat. This is from from the startups. Sunny, you can unmute yourself too if you want to just access yourself.
Sure. So I was told that if you're looking for, like, I need a MVP actually. And I was told, one of the important things is that if you're going to have an MVP on that side, is that you should be able to speak the coding language, at least understand it. Do you think that that's important?
I think that depends. If you have like a tech founder that you trust, I think that's probably my number one. Like, okay, if you can, you can trust them to like figure that stuff out. I think if you're like contracting or like, you're like, contracting with someone to build it out. In that case, it might be helpful just to know some of the lingo and know like what they're doing, so that you can kind of have a basis for like, okay, we're going to need a developer who knows JavaScript because our contractor is building it in JavaScript using, this library or this framework. I think that's probably good information, because with a contractor, there's less you can control. They're just looking for the functionality or what you want built, right? So they're not going to be particularly interested in your long-term goals as much.
Steven, you have any final thoughts? This was great.
I think this is awesome. Thanks, Austen, for coming on. I think it's great to have some insight. You've shared some awesome answers, some awesome insight for a lot of people. Curling, I know we also have Brianna on here. Brianna, do you have any questions you'd like to ask?
And we did get another one from the chat from Lewis. I can ask that question first, Stephen.
Yeah, go for
it. Once a user experience, because you were talking about UX design and stuff, and I'm glad you went into that, Austen. But once a UX design is kind of laid out, how would a non-technical founder build an MVP from that kind of wireframe or something like that? Can you do a reasonable MVP using kind of these non-tech coding sites? I know they've been popping around, some of these non-coding sites, stuff like that. But is that clear, Austen?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, they're asking, once the UX/design stuff is already built out, how does a non-tech founder kind of go from there, or what's the next step? Or
there are some of the groups that there have been some of these kind of non-tech coding sites you can kind of use, even for on the app side. I've kind of used some of those for some of the hackathons, right? To actually create something like that. But have you seen what that work well, or what would be something like for a non-technical?
Yeah, I think I've seen that work well for someone who's trying to sell their idea, or like get a technical co-founder on board. I don't think those kinds of sites are necessarily too good for like a proof of concept, even, because they're good for like presenting. They're kind of more like an advanced presentation kind of thing, but I don't think that they would work well for actual proving that your application is functional necessarily, or possible to build even. I think it's more, it's helpful for selling it and for kind of like trying to present your idea more clearly. But I don't know, as far as like MVP, I wouldn't go that route.
No, that's a good way to kind of describe it too. I have seen that used in like creating something about like a kind of proof of concept, right? That they would use for presenting. Like they would present that with their pitch deck, or present to another development team to show like, hey, this is kind of what I wanted to use. But I think one that I've learned, if you're going to work with some developer or even to your technical co-founder, as much information you can give someone, it's still good. So that process, at least going through that, is still a good exercise for I guess for the Lewis, like if you're like that kind of the what would you call it, the CEO. It's just good to actually know all that, what that whole development stages are. So that's good. I don't think we got anything from Brianna. I think we're good at that point on the questions. Lois says thumbs up on that. And she's Lois is actually great. She's a good ecosystem builder. So thanks, Lois. I think that in that way, I think we're in good shape. I'll let first of all, I should just say, Austen, thanks for always being just so generous and helpful in the kind of like the startup community. And I know as you're learning, you've been helping us learn too about new stuff. So that's been great. Like we're kind of living vicariously through you, your technical journey. But I'll let Stephen wrap it up.
Okay, awesome. Well, Austin, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with before we let you go?
I mean, just, yeah, thank you for letting me share. I think it's fun, and I think it's great what you guys are doing. So yeah, thanks for letting me be here today.
Awesome. Well, we know we really enjoyed having you on and sharing this insight, answering some questions for those who were able to tune in, and we hope that when we post this recording, it's going to help a lot of people out. And just to kind of echo from the beginning of the presentation, for those of you watching, if you get a chance to like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff, it helps us reach more people with these recordings. And so who knows, that interaction that you gave this video might have allowed this to reach a startup or entrepreneur that really needed maybe to hear one of these things in the video. So I'll kind of leave you with that. But for everyone on, thanks for tuning in for another edition of Tech School. Hope you guys have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Take care, Austen.